pictures of their own imaginings in the sky. They want to usher in the messianic age. They don't mind if it's brought on by nuclear age. They are so sure of their ability to outlive the utility of their bodies. But just remember that was the last thought in the brain of every suicide bomber and every hijacked plane. Follow the guidebook for an afterlife. Which one do I try? Which one do I try?
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Stay-at-Home Atheist podcast. I'm Jon and I am the Stay-at-Home Atheist.
And I'm Stacey.
The mission of our podcast is to challenge antiquated views on family values, particularly those in line with religious and conservative perspectives, and to promote forward-thinking and secular alternatives.
Before we get into this episode, we wanted to thank Shelley Siegel again, the intro song, Afterlife. You can find her on shelleysiegel.com or anywhere you can buy music. And also thank Phillip R. Gunter for our animation.
As always, thank you, Colonel. For this episode, we would like to talk a bit about the importance of exposing your children to different cultures, right? About how it's important to give them experiences and not just things.
Yeah, and so we started kind of making that adjustment for our family a couple years ago. We started reducing the amount of presents given and making sure that our Christmases were filled with experiences, not just opening presents on one day of the year. And trying to fit in as many different experiences throughout their time, you know, whether it was a vacation or a weekend or whatever, to make sure our kids understood different cultures.
Yeah, I think it's important. Like when you just give your children things, they have a very specific kind of experience, right? Building Legos or watching a movie or playing a video game. And those things are fine. And I don't discourage that.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I mean, you said a couple of years ago. I mean, I think it's been set many years ago now. But at some point we just told our kids, like, look, you're not going to get a lot of Christmas presents
because you don't need anything.
Because we're going to travel.
Yeah.
We're going to do something interesting.
We'd rather spend our money on that.
What have we done, just quickly, if we can come up with a little rundown of things over Christmas holiday instead of a bunch of presents?
We've been to New York. We've been to Chicago.
Orlando, Disney and Universal.
A couple times because that's always fun.
More than a couple. We used to be annual pass holders at Universal Studios, so more than a couple of times.
Yep. Taking the kids to the mountains, gone to Florida, just gone to different towns, done different things. And it's not always about just the Christmas week, but, we were lucky enough to have our kids in homeschool for the last several years, so we could vacation whenever we wanted and whenever it made sense to go somewhere. So we were able to take them to London and to Paris. And so we've exposed them well outside of their comfort zone. So they have these desires now to go other places, right?
They have like a breadth of experience now, right? Like they've experienced things enough that they understand that in other places
things are different.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's great. Things are different and it's great.
You completed my sentence for me, Stacey. Oh, it's so sweet. Yeah, so we kind of like to...
We want to talk about kind of how we've experienced that with our kids and how we've kind of brought them along on that journey, and now how we're kind of having to take a step back now that we brought the boys in and restart that work because we realize they've missed out on a lot of that.
Yeah, we haven't talked a whole lot about, quote, the boys, but basically, if you've listened to our episodes, you're aware, but it's kind of tangential. We haven't really discussed it at great length, but we took in two of my nephews. Their names are Hayden and Ryan, and they live with us. They've been living with us since July, and because they came from a situation where they weren't able to experience those kinds of things, like Stacey said, we are taking almost a full step in the other direction because we realize now we should attempt to bring them back up to where we are, right? We want them to have those experiences. It's difficult because that's two extra mouths to feed. Financially, it's two entirely new children in the household. So all of these things are a little different, but we're working to give them that exact same cultural experience.
Yeah, and I think, it's... that there's a difference, right, between families that aren't middle class, right, and upper class. There's all these different experiences you get to have based on how much money you have. So we don't want to just focus on, oh, you must take your kids abroad, right? There's a lot more to exposing your family to different cultures and to different experiences. We just didn't realize kind of how far behind they were. And so that's why we thought it would be a good topic for discussion.
Well, not only about how far behind they are, but I think it's important, and this is something we've kind of had to figure out or realize for ourselves. It's important to recognize that people with lesser advantages or fewer advantages have fewer advantages. You
Right.
forget sometimes when you're living it that other people don't have your life or what you can possibly do. Your opportunity.
Right.
That's the word I was looking for. Thank you. So they came from a situation, no fault of their own, where they just didn't have the same opportunities. And it's funny the things that clue you into that.
Yeah.
When you're kids, you say something about, oh, there's this great Jamaican restaurant we'd like to take you guys to. And they're like, what's Jamaican?
What is
What's
Jamaican
food? They don't even have an understanding of what that might be. And it's hard to look at yourself in the mirror and realize that that's privilege. We've had that privilege.
Absolutely.
So of course we want to give that to them.
Well, I think there's a whole lot of things here, right? They didn't understand what Jamaican food was. They'd never really tried anything outside of American and, American Mexican
And
to
fast
understand.
foods.
Yeah, the fast foods and, so being able to take them to Indian restaurants and Thai restaurants and expose them to these other cultures and actually talk about what these cultures bring, because you can't just say to them, well, we're going to go out for Thai food. They don't understand what that means. Where is Thailand? What does Thai mean to me? Why do I care? And so, I think we've been lucky to be able to take our kids on a lot of trips and to expose them, in many different ways. But even if you can't go to places, there are ways to expose them to different cultures and help them learn about different things just within your own backyard. So, I don't want people to feel like they can't expose your kids to these things, or maybe it's not important because I can't go there. Because really what we've seen from them is that lack of exposure really kind of creates this just unawareness of what's going on outside their bubble. And not to go off too far on a tangent, but we did start watching Born This Way, which is about the Down syndrome kids in California. Great show on A&E if you haven't watched it. Total tearjerker, heart-wrenching, amazing show.
And they didn't even pay us to say that.
I know, right?
Hey, wait a minute. They should pay us to say that.
Well, we made the kids sit down and watch it with us because they didn't know what Down syndrome was. So, it's not just cultures. It's life outside of yourself and what you can bring to the table. And so, we find it extremely important that we talk about how we've seen that kind of boil up and what we're trying to do and how we're trying to get through that.
Well, I think kind of a good way to boil it down to just a fine point, because it's not just culture, though that's what we're going to focus on mostly. But when you don't expose your children to the truth of other people's realities, then guess what they're never going to understand? The truth of other people's realities. It's hard to have empathy for people if you don't understand them.
Yeah.
It's easy to say, oh, well, they're the other. Like look what's going on right now. Oh, well, they shouldn't have been coming into this country because, they shouldn't be here. What they're doing is breaking the law. It's easy to call someone a criminal instead of recognizing what they're going through.
Yeah.
Instead of understanding that these are people seeking asylum. They're refugees. They need help. And instead of getting help, they're getting, pepper sprayed or whatever,
And not to get on too much of a soapbox, but I feel like we have a huge lack of empathy in the U.S. right now. And that I feel like a lot of problems that we see each day are because people just don't care about somebody else. They only care about themselves. They only care about getting to the next step for themselves. And you have to stop and look outside of your own bubble. And if you don't, then you're going to be able to brush off things like tear gassing a child.
Yeah.
And I'll stop there.
Yeah. So soapbox has now been dismantled, and we stored it back under the bed where it belongs.
Yes.
But we
Until the
will
next
break
episode.
it back out if need be. Well, I think it's Stacey said something I really like there. So I think it's important. Well, actually, before that, I think it's important to say, look, you can't all be as fortunate as we have been to go to London and Paris and Wales and Italy and Germany and all these places, right? Not everybody can do that, and we totally understand. So
if you want some tips on cheap travel, let me know. It's my passion.
So the thing is, I think a really, really good way to expose, and this was already said, that's why I'm bringing it back up, to expose children to culture is through food. I feel like I'm channeling my inner Bourdain, you know?
Right.
The way a culture eats is so much a part of who they are. In recognizing simple things like some cultures eat with their hands. Some cultures, it's like in Italy, we learned when we went to Italy that if you aren't slurping your noodles up, because I'm very particular about mouth noise and things and chewing sounds.
Oh, yes, he is.
So, you know, if you're like me and you're like, oh, don't do that, then you might hear other people around you eating and think, oh, that's so gross. But you have to understand that that's just how they do it. And they kind of expect you to do it too.
Well, and I think, you know, one of the keys, I think, is that you have to not only expose your kids, but you have to have conversations about them. You have to educate them in a way that is interesting to them so that they get it. You know, when we went to Paris, it was the first time that we had went to another country where we didn't speak the language. And to be honest, I was terrified. I didn't know how we were going to be able to communicate, right? And so we talked a lot. We did a lot of research. We talked about how do we tip? What is the right way to behave? You know, how do we say some phrases in French so we're not just being dumb, snobby Americans when we get there, you know, and we did all of that research and we shared it with the kids.
And I think it was important we did that because even we had a number of kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Misconceptions, right?
Yeah.
I remember when I first started telling some of my friends, people I knew had traveled pretty extensively, that we were going to go to Paris. A lot of people told me that the French hate Americans and they're very rude and, you know,
just be prepared.
If you can't speak French, they're not even going to talk to you. Like, we heard all these terrible things, and the experience we had isn't even close to what people told us. And that's why it's important, because you have a misconception about an entire culture. And if you don't experience that for yourself, then how are you going to know better?
Well, and I think it's important to not let those misconceptions guide you either, right? So we were nervous getting there, but we tried to prepare ourselves so that we didn't just walk in saying, cater to me, right? Because I'm a tourist, cater to me. And we tried very hard to always ask, you know, to say, we don't speak French, do you speak English? Before we'd start talking to people. And, you know, we didn't have any bad experiences, and everybody spoke English, which only made us feel less intelligent because we only speak one language. And, you know,
hey, I speak Pig Latin.
Yeah, and Klingon.
Stace.
But I think that you have to approach it with an open mind and a desire to want to learn, instead of what you see and what you hear, which is, you cater to me.
You know what just jumped in my head, and it really bothers me that I thought about this just now? You're talking about how you have to approach it, you know, with the right mindset. You have to be ready to go there and learn about somebody else's experience instead of in like assuming they're going to cater to you. And right when you said that, what flashed in my mind was that video clip of Donald Trump pushing past all the other leaders and stepping in front of them and straightening his jacket and looking up like, I'm the fucking important one.
Yeah.
Pardon my French. And I was infuriated then, but that's what I think about Americans. And imagine that's the leader of our country, right? That's what they think about us too. So you don't want to go there and push past everybody and say you're the center of fucking attention.
And let's be fair. There are plenty of Americans that do that. They go to any other country. They think that
Logan
I have
Paul.
money. Yeah,
Sorry.
I have money. I can go do whatever I want. Screw your culture. Screw your traditions. I'm just going to be an ass because I have money. And I don't agree with that. And, you know, on the Logan Paul thing, we use that as a great teaching moment. That's another way to teach your kids about culture, is to be aware of what's occurring in the news, right? What's going on that your kids are going to see, and having those conversations about why what he did was wrong. Then it opens the door to talk about their culture, right? And what they do, what their traditions are, and exposing them to a different life. Because otherwise, they just think everybody lives like we do, right? And I think when we travel, we pretty much always stay in Airbnbs, because that's how you get a true perspective of life there.
Yeah,
right. Every hotel looks the same.
Yeah, if you just stay in the nicest, touristy hotel, then they're all going to speak English to you. They're all going to cater to you. They're going to have that continental breakfast. You're not going to get out of your comfort zone. Not to say staying in a hotel is wrong, but you just need to understand that unless you stay in a very specific kind of a hotel that's not catered to us, but you need to understand that what you've done is put yourself in a situation where you still have to leave that environment, that comfort, to experience what you've gone there to experience.
Yeah, and I think it's important for them to understand that most houses only have one bathroom. Most European homes are smaller. It's not this big massive thing, and that's a great thing. And so being able to expose them to the whole of the culture, being able to walk around neighborhoods and be part of that area, we think is extremely important, which is why we travel.
Take public transportation, walk a lot of places.
Yep. And I think you can do that locally too, right? So again, not to say you just have to travel, but hey, if you're going to take your kids to a Thai restaurant, do some research on Thailand. Talk to your kids about what are their belief structures, what are their cultures like, what do they do, what are their foods, why do they eat those foods, and be able to have more of an educated conversation instead of just, well, we're going to have rice with some curry.
Well, and if your kid is the kind of kid who looks at the menu and sees
chicken
nuggets from the kids' menu, then say no.
Yeah. Make
them try. Not that we've never said yes. Obviously, circumstances can arise where you're just like, fine, just eat that. But especially if it's not the first time. But make them try these things. And look, if you can't afford to go out to restaurants all the time, well, look up these recipes. Make it at home. We make Thai food at the house all the time. We keep saying Thai. Like, is that all we care about?
It's
Thai?
My favorite food.
It's so good. It's not my favorite, but it's very, very good.
But I think there is a level of, you need to educate yourself and then educate your children. And if you don't do that, you're not learning and they're not learning. And again, I think that this wraps around to some of the conversation around why, again, we think culture is important. It brings empathy. It brings thoughts outside of today to their world. They walk to the school bus, they go to school, they get off the bus, they come home, they play Fortnite. I'm sure most of your kids do too. But, you got to take them out of that sometimes and make sure that they're learning about different things. I mean, we kind of had a kind of surprising realization when we started talking about Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. We don't celebrate Thanksgiving in any traditional way. It is a time that you get off of work and off of school, so obviously we take that time to do something with each other, right? We play board games, we eat food, just like anybody else does. But we try to intentionally not make it traditional. Like, we don't.
There's no turkey.
Yeah, we don't cook a turkey. We don't have cranberry sauce. We don't have like all the traditional Thanksgiving fixins, as they would say from where I'm from. We have a pie. Everyone loves pie, so get a pie. Yeah. But like this year, we scratch made pizza dough, and we had all these different ingredients, and we let the kids make their own pizzas. Yeah. And that's what we decided to do for Thanksgiving. And what happened was, and I mean, look, that's what we would have done anyway, because we don't celebrate traditional Thanksgiving. But we were walking to the school bus one morning, and they were talking about Thanksgiving and how,
that's make a turkey.
Well, not just that, but so I was like, do you know what Thanksgiving is? Well, yeah, it's when we celebrated
and broke
with
bread
the Native
with
Americans.
Indians.
Yeah, they said Indians.
And they said Indians.
And so I had to explain to them that's not really what Thanksgiving is. That what we have done, we not being us individually, obviously, but our society, our culture did to the natives in this country is strip all of their stuff from them. We tricked them into giving us their land, and then when they said, wait, that's not what we were trying to do, that's our land, we killed them for it, and then we partied. And that's what Thanksgiving is all about in a nutshell. And it's funny because you lose track of that reality because our kids know that. Yeah. They've known that since they were able to know that.
And these kids are in their, mid-teens almost.
13 and 14.
And had no idea that was really what it was all about.
And I think when the education system doesn't properly teach your children the reality, then you have to be there to pick up that slack. And that's what we've tried to do. So we had all these conversations about what we've done to Native American culture and how we're still doing it today. Yeah. We're still taking their land. We're still,
taking away their rights.
And there's like a new bill or something that went on about voting where they don't have traditional street address, so maybe they won't be able to vote. Like, we just keep shitting on these people.
Yeah, and I think that
and it's nothing to celebrate. That was what I was going to say.
Exactly. And so that kind of led us to something we'd been thinking about, but we took the time to kind of have them sit down and talk about, well, what do they want to experience? What's important to them? And that kind of started to lead us to the topic for our whole segment here, which was we had them write some lists about what they want. So, I keep calling it a bucket list. John keeps telling me to stop calling it a bucket list because it's not about them dying, but it is a bucket list in some sense of what are things that are important to them, and so we took the time while we were all together to have them sit down and start writing their lists, and it was very eye-opening.
Well, yeah, I mean, because at first we thought about, and this sounds crazy, but we thought about not having our son do a list because he's done all these things, and we're like, well, we don't need to know what you want to do. But then you're like, oh, that's not really
shitty.
fair, right? So it doesn't matter that he's gotten to have a bunch of experiences. He should tell us other things he'd like to try. And of course, we tried to explain to them that, like, we can't do them. We're not promising we can do everything, all of this, right?
But let's get the list together. Let's talk about it.
I mean, we're already securing both of the nephews' first item, basically, that they would like to do, which is to see snow. But when Stacey alluded to it being eye-opening, when you have a child who has experienced other cultures, they, because not just our child, they're gonna write totally different things. So just as an example, I'm not going to read the whole list. Sonny wrote a lot of stuff. But just as an example of some of the things he put on there, some of our viewers will appreciate this. His first item is to go to Austin, which I thought was kind of cool. But
because we went without him.
He put wanting to go to Ireland to see the Golden Gate Bridge because he's not gone there, right? He put wanting to go to Greenland and Iceland. So I combined them. Germany, the Netherlands, Switzerland, Antarctica. So he just has all these like grand ideas about going to all these places. On the opposite side of that, our nephews wrote things like fly in a plane, try lamb,
eat different candies from different countries,
go to the theater. They've never been to, like, not the movie theater, but like to a theater, right? Which I was actually impressed by that one. I didn't expect either of them to say that.
I know, right?
I happen to like things like opera and musicals and plays. So I was like, oh, okay, cool. Go to New York, because we talk about New York all the time and how much we love it.
Yeah, and I think, that it was actually difficult to get them to put more than 2 things on their list. Like, we had to talk about things that they had mentioned before, because they didn't even know the opportunities that were out there.
They had no concept of what they can do.
Yeah. They'd never left Florida until we brought them here.
Well, one of them I think had a DC trip, but I might be... no, New Orleans trip.
Yeah, New Orleans. So
but that's very close to where we're from.
Like an hour from where they were from. So
and they
not
didn't
really
stay like in the city either, so it wasn't like getting that culture.
Yeah, so I mean, it really does make you think how sheltered, and I hate to use that word, but how sheltered some children are to what's going on around them and what they might even want to do. So tell me, as a parent, if you have a child who has never left their little town, isn't exposed to any culture, and doesn't really know what's out there in the world, how are they supposed to realistically decide what they want to do when they grow up? Right? The whole education process ties all back together, in my mind anyway, that if you're not exposed to culture and to what's out there in the world and different cities and different, areas and regions and things, you're not exposed to the different jobs and the different opportunities that are out there. And so you get stuck in this little town, little mindset. And how do you get them out of that without literally plucking them out of that? I don't know.
Which is what we did, at least to an extent.
Yeah.
We took our nephews and we took them out of the little town that they grew up in and the little experience that they had. And we brought them somewhere and gave them something completely different. But that's still not enough. You can't, like, it all kind of ties back to things like racism. It is hard for some people to recognize the humanity in others, to have empathy for others if they just don't understand them.
Yeah.
And it's not just about language, it's just recognizing that other people and other cultures are different, and that's fine. I mean, wouldn't it be awfully boring if we all had the same things and liked the same things and just generally had the same experiences? If we were all the same, like, what would you talk about?
Exactly.
I think that's kind of why they say opposites attract, because you have different things to talk to each other about that are interesting, not all the same things.
Right.
Even though we're very similar people.
And so I think that's a good place to wrap up. And I just wanted to kind of, say a couple things in summary. We said we feel experiences are important, and we definitely do. But that's not to say that we don't understand the desire for children to have things, and our children have things. And as we brought the boys here, they have received things. And, we try to make sure that they're content in their life, but not over the top where they ask for something and they always get it. I mean,
so what you don't want is your children to have things and look down on other children who don't
have things.
And you would think that coming from a situation where you don't have things, that wouldn't be a problem, but I don't think that's always true either. I mean, I think it's really easy. Look at politically, right? People who actually did fight to get, their wealth, people who did work for it, unlike our current president, who still have that bootstrap mentality. You just have to do it yourself without understanding that the circumstances that allowed for them to get to where they aren't necessarily in place for everybody. So it's easy to go from nothing to something and still not understand it. Yeah. So you have to make an effort to overcome those kinds of thoughts. Yep. So we just don't want you thinking we're saying don't buy your kids an Xbox, take them to London. That's not what we're saying. No. Do both if you can.
Exactly. And if you can't, then at least expose them to, maybe some TV shows. Maybe there's some great audiobooks on different countries and different cultures. And there are so many ways to expose your kids to teach them that there are other people out there and it's okay that they're different. And maybe it's kind of cool to learn about what they do.
And I know we're wrapping this up, but let me just say, expose your children to Star Trek: The Next Generation. This show does a wonderful job of talking about other cultures. They missed the mark a few times, but the whole idea is that it doesn't matter where you're from, right? It doesn't matter what your life has been, that you can be this too. And I think it's a really, not just Star Trek, not everybody has to like Star Trek, but ideas like that. Doctor Who, sci-fi in general does a pretty good job of showing you cultural differences and how you can make that stuff work. So I'm a strong proponent of sci-fi reading and viewing.
And then there are a lot of good documentaries and a lot of good shows on Netflix and Hulu that you can expose your kids to. Anthony Bourdain is a great example because he not only exposes you to food, but also a lot about the culture and where the food comes from. So, there are just ways for you to do that for your kids, and we think it's important, and we strive to do that with ours, and we wanted to share our experiences with you.
So thank you so much for joining us in our probably slightly rambly episode about culture, because there's so many little venues or avenues you can take that venues. What am I talking about? There's so many avenues you can take with this discussion. So thank you for sticking around for it. As usual, don't forget to like our video on YouTube, subscribe to it if you'd like, press the little bell icon if you want to get, notifications.
Comment. Thoughts, questions. We also will take your email at
Jon@stayathomeatheist.com, and that's John with no H, Jon.
And we like to hear how you guys expose your kids to different cultures and different experiences. So drop us a line.
Yeah, what worked for you? What you think maybe could work for us or for others that we didn't talk about? Because by no means is our experience the only one.
That's right.
Bertrand Russell once said, "A good life is one inspired by love and guided by knowledge." Thank you for joining.
Till next time.
Thousands and thousands are humming, the second coming's coming. The environmental responsibility is succumbing to the suicidal longing for paradise. Can't they see it's already before our eyes? All that makes us who we are, we find cannot survive without a mind. But you're so afraid to die, you're willing to sacrifice, living through it all with the knowledge that